So in the case of this one, what you see behind me is you'll see an empty file that I've got here in Sublime Text ready to go. And before I put anything into this, what I'm going to actually do with this is we're going to start by creating what I refer to as a default HTML template. This is parts that every HTML page has to have and will generally all have in the exact same way. And so if you make this and then save it as a blank template at your starting point, you'll then have that for any HTML page that you're going to make after that. So even when there's nothing in here, we can go to File, we can go to Save As, and we can navigate to where we're supposed to do this. So in Lecture Tutorial 1, you see there, and then in the file name here for Save As, I'm going to call this default template .html, and that .html is important because Sublime Text will have no idea what kind of text file I'm creating unless I put the file name in there. So now that it's .html and I save, now you'll see I have this default template.html, and this area here where the text is going to enter, Sublime Text knows that it's working with an HTML file now, and as a result of that, it's going to give me sort of like coloring and text and indents that are going to work with this, that's going to help me sort of see and read this code as I go through. Our default template is where we're going to put sort of all the basics that every HTML file should typically have. And although this isn't the first thing, there's going to be something we put in above. I wanted to start with the HTML element so that you can understand how we sort of structure tags within HTML. So a thing to note that if I were to write this here, what you're looking at there is you're looking at me marking up something, describing it as the HTML element. We will tend to always refer to this as a tag in many ways, and so this is what I would sometimes call an HTML tag. What it's generally made up of is an opening and closing angle bracket, then the element itself, which in this case is HTML, which we open like this, and then a lot of HTML elements will also have a closing tag, which is formatted in the same way with angle brackets and the name of the element, but then with a / before that element's name, denoting the beginning and the end of the HTML tag as its whole. So all of what's contained inside is considered a child of and contained by the HTML tag. And so when it comes to an HTML page, everything that the browser is supposed to read as HTML markup is generally inside those two tags. So the other thing that you're going to see here is, of course, we've got the HTML element, but the other thing that you'll see is that inside opening tags, you'll often see the element, and then you'll potentially see attributes. There's a wide variety of attributes that can exist. What the attribute can be is in many ways going to be dependent on the tag that it's applied to. Some can be applied to any tag, some are typically used only on specific tags. One of which is commonly applied to the HTML tag is the lang attribute, which is short for language. When you're declaring an attribute, you'll typically have the name of the attribute equals quotation marks, and then inside the quotation marks a value that is related to the attribute. And so in this case, an attribute value of en is code for English, and so what we're establishing here is this is HTML, which will involve content inside it that is in the language English, which a web browser will see this, and it will read this attribute and interpret that property as being a marker that this website is going to be English. And so as a result, if someone's using a browser where its default setting is not English, if it's Chrome as an example, Chrome then may know to recommend to the user that they get a translation from English to whatever their default and native language is. There's one other thing we have to do in a page like this to start it off. So everything inside the HTML is where main work we're going to do. And there's one unique little tag up at the top that we're going to have to deal with. That will be how we sort of set up and declare what kind of file this is to the browser as well. And that we're going to make use of the angle brackets, and we're going to say open angle bracket, exclamation point, doc type, So we're declaring the type of document this is, and again, we're saying HTML. So what this is trying to do is not necessarily to declare it as HTML, same as this, is it's declaring also the type of HTML that the browser can expect this to be. And if this was HTML3 or 3.5 or XHTML 4.0, this would be written differently. But with HTML5, which is the kind of HTML we're going to be working with in this tutorial, we just have to write it as HTML, and then the browser will know what to do with that. So that is getting our sort of default template started. The next thing we're going to need, though, inside the HTML is that there's two main areas where you tend to put either content or instructions for your HTML page. The first of those is generally referred to as the head tag. And so we have our opening and closing head elements. And then anything that's inside the head tag is designed to be read by the browser. And so if we are linking other files like style sheets, if we are declaring other sort of attributes such as the character set and other meta attributes for the HTML file, that will all go in the head tag. And then the content that'll be displayed in the browser to the user, we generally will put inside what's known as the body tag. And so in the case of this, we've got head, we've got body, we've got HTML. If we want to be as default as possible, this is the main stuff that's needed in general to make this stuff work. But there's a couple last things that we need to really start to finish this off, and that is some instructions to the browser so that it knows exactly what it's trying to deal with. The first thing we have to do is we have to define the character set. And so the character set in this case is telling the browser again sort of like what it might be, what it's supposed to be reading and seeing. In general, for the purposes of our class and our students, you don't need to know a lot about what character set means, but there are some readings you can find online that's going to get you a bit more of an understanding of that if you want to dig deeper. But for our purposes for now, just know that you need to write a meta tag, which will define some information to the browser about the document that it's loading. And then in this case, we then give it the attribute of character set, and then the value of UTF-8. Because the meta tag isn't marking up content, so there isn't an opening and closing tag, it's just declaring an attribute and its value, and so as a result of that, we just have to have the opening tag and we don't need to have the closing tag. So in the case of this one, we're saying the meta tag is telling us this is the character set the system is working with. The last other two things that we can work with in the head to sort of finally set up our default is that the site must have a title, opening and closing like this, and whatever you write in this title area is going to show up in sort of like the tab at the top in your browser, and so the text in the tab in your browser will be whatever you've got here. And in this case, what we're going to write is something like my first web page, little bracket. So one last thing we're going to do today with this default template. It's not required. This level of default is fine for many cases, but we want to build our web pages working with HTML5 and CSS3 as responsively as possible. And one of the things that means is that we want to make sure that whatever we build from this point forward is set up that we're expecting it to load on mobile devices and desktop devices, and for that to work seamlessly by default. And one of the things we need to do to enable that is we need one other meta tag. And in this case, the meta tag is going to have a couple attributes, including a name, which you're going to write as viewport. And then it's going to have a content attribute with values labeled as follows. Width equals device width, comma, and then initial scale equals 1. So what that's going to be saying is to set the sort of the width of the viewport to be the size of the browser window or the device, in this case like a phone as an example, and to not zoom the website out and scale it down so that the browser can show everything at once, and instead set it to its sort of natural, just normal zoom scale, which means that everything will appear on your mobile browser at full size. and that will help it from potentially zooming in and out in a way that makes it hard to read. And so we're going to save this just like this. And that's pretty much it for the template. Anything that you see here, you can pretty much have in almost any website that you ever design, and they're almost all going to work like that. The main thing that you'll customize every time you turn the template into a page is be making sure that you change the title. And then as we get in the rest of the content and the other things we need, you may also have, depending on your unique site, you might have different style sheets linked in JavaScript, and those things will all change. But regardless of what you do, you're going to have at least this stuff. And so that's our default template, and we can use that to make all of our subsequent pages in further assignments in this course, or if you're coming from outside the school, in whatever you want to do. So that gives you a good starting point. So the next thing we're going to do after this is we're going to actually start trying to get some content into this and marked up so that it appears and works and functions in a browser. And so if you go back